2 police officers, left to die in the snow. Someone inside the department changed their patrol route, erased their reports, and sent them straight into an ambush. The river was supposed to finish what the attack started. It didn't, because a German shepherd named Koda smelled blood beneath the ice before dawn, and the quiet man on the other end of that leash wasn't who Greyhaven thought he was. Body in this mountain town knew his real story. That was exactly how Caleb Vance wanted it. Was also exactly why whoever buried those officers in the snow had no idea what was coming for them. Before we go further, if you're watching this and you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button right now. Every week we bring you stories like this one, gripping, intense, and the kind you can't stop once you start. Drop a like and tell me in the comments what city or country are you watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Let's go back to that bridge. The temperature had dropped to 11 degrees overnight. Caleb Vance knew that's not because he checked his phone he never did before a run, but because of the way the air bit through the seam of his jacket collar and settled against the side of his neck like a blade pressed flat. 11 degrees had a specific feeling, so did 12. So did 9. After enough winters in places that had no business being cold, a man learned to read temperature the way other people read clocks. He ran the same route every morning, not out of habit, out of discipline. Was a difference, and Caleb had spent years learning it. The road out of his property became gravel after 40 meters, then packed dirt, then nothing. Just the tree line opening onto the flat stretch of valley that ran southeast toward the Harrow River. The sky was that particular shade of dark blue that exists only in the window between night and dawn, too late to be black, too early to be gray. Stars were still out in the west. The east hadn't decided anything yet. Koda ran 5 feet ahead of him, the German shepherd's breath, rising in small jets of white mist, pause, finding the frozen ground with the certainty of an animal that trusted its own instincts more than it trusted anything else. Caleb had raised Koda from 11 weeks old. He'd trained him the way he'd been trained, reward precision, not enthusiasm. The dog understood patience. He understood the difference between a threat and noise. Most people in Greyhaven thought Caleb Vance was just a quiet guy with a big dog and a daughter who went to Birchwood Elementary. They weren't wrong. They just weren't seeing everything. He ran in silence. No headphones. No music. Sound was information, and he'd learned a long time ago that a man who filled his own ears with noise was a man who'd already decided the world wasn't interesting enough to listen to. Caleb disagreed. The river came up on his left after the 3rd mile. He could hear it before he saw it, or rather he could hear the absence of it. The Harrow had frozen solid 3 weeks ago. What remained was the low moan of wind moving through the canyon walls above the ice, and the occasional crack from somewhere deep beneath the surface where the current still pressed against its own ceiling. Koda slowed, not stopped. Slowed and then veered left. Caleb noticed immediately. The dog didn't break routine without reason. He'd learned that in their first winter together, Koda was not a dramatic animal. He didn't react to squirrels or rabbits or sounds in the brush unless something about those sounds was wrong. Koda, the dog, kept moving, angling off the path toward the railway bridge. It was an old Union Pacific crossing, abandoned since the mid-90s when the freight line had been rerouted through Casper. The bridge itself was still structurally sound. Caleb had checked it. The first week he moved to Greyhaven, out of habit more than necessity, but nobody used it. Town's kids had spray-painted the concrete supports. Someone had zip-tied a broken bicycle to the railing 6 months ago. It was one of those things that nobody bothered to remove because nobody thought about it enough to care. Koda ducked beneath the bridge approach and stopped. Caleb's hand found the flashlight clipped to his waistband before his brain finished processing why. He didn't think about that. He just moved. The beam swept left to right under the bridge's shadow, and in the second pass, the light caught something that made Caleb's breath stop. Because he'd never seen it before. Because he'd seen it too many times. A man's hand, extended at an angle that arms don't reach voluntarily. Fingers curled slightly inward. Dark fabric at the wrist, uniform fabric. Heavy duty. the kind that comes with a department-issued jacket, had drifted over everything. If Koda hadn't pulled, if Caleb had been 5 minutes earlier or later, the drift would have completed itself by morning, and there would have been nothing visible at all. He moved in fast, knelt, and brushed snow away from the face with his bare hand. Police officer, male, mid-30s. The name tag on his jacket read Mercer in block letters, partially obscured by ice. He had a gash above his left ear deep, not from a fall, from impact. Blunt force, deliberate angle, someone who knew how to hit a man to drop him quickly. His pulse was there but weak, and his lips had taken on the first gray-blue tinge that Caleb had been trained to recognize as hypothermia, moving past the warning stage. "Come on." Caleb pressed 2 fingers firm against the carotid. "You're still here. Stay there." He was already scanning the surrounding area. Footprints, multiple sets leading away from the bridge, toward the eastern bank. The snow was still filling them in, which meant they weren't old. Whoever made them had left within the last hour, maybe 90 minutes. He found the second officer 8 feet away, half-wedged between a concrete support and a frozen drainage channel. The name tag read ROE. She'd taken a blow to the right shoulder, dislocated, maybe fractured, and her radio was missing. Dropped. Missing. Her holster was still snapped shut. They hadn't taken her weapon. That detail stopped him for exactly 2 seconds. They left the guns. They left the badges. They left the wallets. This wasn't robbery. Caleb pulled out his phone and dialed 911. While it rang, he pressed his jacket unzipped, pulled off in one motion over Mercer's chest and shoulders. Cold hit Caleb's skin immediately. He ignored it. 911. What's your emergency? 2 officers down. Hypothermia and head trauma under the old Union Pacific Bridge over Harrow River. I need 2 ambulances, and I need them now. One victim has a serious head wound. The other has a shoulder injury consistent with dislocation or fracture. Are hypothermic. How copy? A brief pause. He could hear the dispatcher recalibrating. Sir, can you write it down? Union Pacific Bridge, Harrow River, south approach. That's where you're going. Send EMS and notify the department. These are your people. He hung up. Koda stood at the perimeter, watching the tree line. Moving, just watching that low, steady tension that meant he'd caught something, but hadn't determined what. Caleb didn't look at the trees. Not yet. First, he worked checking airways, repositioning both officers to reduce heat loss, using Rowe's own jacket lining to insulate Mercer's neck. He'd done triage in conditions worse than this, on people in worse shape than these 2, with less than nothing available. The muscle memory was still there. It didn't feel like anything. It was just something his hands did while his brain processed everything else. The patrol car was gone. That was the first anomaly he'd filed. 2 officers under a bridge, but no vehicle in sight. They'd been ambushed on foot. There should have been a car somewhere nearby. They'd been run off the road. There'd be tracks on the embankment. There were no tracks on the embankment. Someone had moved the car. Or the car had been disabled and moved before the attack. The footprints concerned him more. Multiple sets. The spacing and depth suggested coordination, not a group running, a crowd scattering. People moving in deliberate formation. Counted at least 3 separate individuals based on the impression patterns. Possibly 4. Hard to be certain with the drift already reclaiming the edges. The sirens came 22 minutes later. Long, too long for a department that claimed to run 5-minute response coverage across the valley. Caleb had already reconstructed both officers' positions, reassessed their vital signs twice, and memorized every detail of the scene beneath that bridge before the first ambulance turned its lights onto the riverbank. He stood back when the paramedics arrived. Answered the questions they asked, declined the ones that were none of their business, and watched the EMTs work over Mercer and Rowe with the particular attention of someone who already knew what they'd find. The patrol supervisor, who arrived at the scene, a heavy-set man named Greer, with a State Department patch on his shoulder and the confident ease of someone who'd never been surprised by anything looked at. Caleb, the way most people in Greyhaven looked at him. like he was background noise. You found them. My dog found them. Greer wrote something on his clipboard. You live out here? 3 miles up the valley. You run out here at 5 in the morning. It wasn't a question, but Caleb answered it anyway. Every morning. Greer nodded slowly, in the way that meant he'd already decided what this was, and was just filling in the paperwork around that decision. We'll need a statement. You have my number. He called Koda back and started walking home. Behind him, he heard Greer mutter something to a deputy. He didn't catch all of it. He caught civilian and Lucky, and that was enough. Lucy was awake when he got home. She was 8 years old and had a specific biological alarm that triggered every morning between 6 and 6:15, regardless of what time she'd gone to sleep, a trait that Caleb had never been able to figure out the origin of. It wasn't from him. He'd been capable of 4-hour increments at any hour since his early 20s. She was sitting at the kitchen table in her pajamas, the ones with the small polar bears on them, eating cereal with an expression of deep focus, reading something on a laminated sheet from school. You're cold, she said, without looking up. It's 11 degrees outside. Why do you run in it? Because 11 degrees is still warnable. He moved to the coffee maker. It had been running on a timer since before he'd left. One of the few luxuries he'd allowed himself in Greyhaven. Lucy considered this with the gravity that 8-year-olds apply to things they don't quite believe, but aren't ready to argue about yet. Mrs. Callahan says Wyoming winters kill people. Mrs. Callahan is correct. Then the people it kills aren't paying attention. He set his mug on the counter and looked at her. She had her mother's eyes, dark brown, direct, and his stubbornness, which he considered a reasonable trade. You've got school, I know. Can Koda come to the car? He always comes to the car. I like when he does. You do. He got her ready for school the way he did everything efficiently, without drama, in a specific order that worked and had always worked. Breakfast, clothes, teeth, hair, jacket, backpack, 5 minutes for any forgotten item, car. He dropped her at Birchwood Elementary at 7:50, watched her walk through the front doors, and sat in the parking lot for a full minute before pulling out. He was already thinking about the footprints. The hospital called at 9. Officer Mercer had a grade 3 concussion and significant hypothermia. Officer Rowe had a fractured clavicle, a dislocated shoulder, and early-stage hypothermia that the doctors said would have become fatal within the hour if she hadn't been found when she was. He got this information not from the department, who had not called him, but from a nurse named Darlene at Greyhaven Regional, who had apparently decided that the man who'd found and stabilized both officers probably deserved a status update. They're both going to make it, she said. Good. The woman, Officer Rowe, she's asking to talk to you. Caleb paused. When? Soon as she's able. Doctor says maybe this afternoon. He spent the morning doing what he usually did, inventory for the wood shop, answering 3 email inquiries about custom furniture orders, letting Koda run in the back field while he repaired a fence section that had shifted in the freeze. Normal things, deliberate things, the kind of routine that required his hands without fully engaging his mind, which meant his mind was doing what minds do when not supervised. Going back to the bridge, he'd looked at the binding material without being obvious about it. Standard freight restraint, heavy-duty polyester webbing, the commercial type, the kind used for securing loads on flatbeds. These consumer stuff from a hardware store, industrial grade. Kind of quantity that implied a legitimate commercial account or a sustained operation with access to supplier-level purchasing. He'd noted the truck impressions in the snow beyond the east bank. Standard pickup. The wheelbase was too wide, the tread too deep. A loaded vehicle, something heavy. The impressions had been partially obscured, but not completely. The way the attack had been executed on the 2 officers, fast, targeted, silent, these were not opportunistic criminals who'd gotten lucky. The radio had been taken from Rowe specifically. Whoever had done this knew she'd be the one to call it in. They'd assessed both officers and made tactical decisions in a compressed window with a frozen river and a blizzard on its way. That was training, or something close enough to it that the difference didn't matter. He went to the hospital at 2 in the afternoon. Tessa Rowe was sitting up in bed with her right arm in a rigid sling and the particular hollow expression of someone who'd been close enough to dying that the return trip hadn't fully settled yet. She was younger than he'd expected, maybe 28, 29. Her dark hair had been pulled back by someone else. Her eyes were clear. "You're the one who found us," she said. "My dog found you. He's not here, so I'm thanking you." She watched him for a moment. "You're not a cop." "No, but you called in a field assessment that my supervisor said was," and I'm quoting, "unusually thorough for a civilian." Supervisor needs better adjectives. Something shifted at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile, more like the edge of one. "I'm Tessa." Caleb, he sat in the chair beside the bed, and she talked. Yezigiunt, to listen, not waiting for his turn to speak, but actually taking in the content and sorting it in real time. She was good, clear, organized, methodical about sequencing events even while clearly in pain. She told him about the previous night, the freight truck they'd followed toward the red, hollow mill district, the way she'd logged it, and the log had disappeared by the time she tried to reference it at the start of the shift. She told him their patrol route had been changed inside the department system, not by dispatch, not by a supervisor they could identify. Just changed, like someone had reached into the database and moved a number. "We were supposed to be on Route 12, she said. "We ended up on the river access road. Who changed it?" "No yet. Nobody's told me, and my lieutenant when I tried to bring it up after the Harrow River reports 2 months ago." She stopped, looked at the window. "He told me suspicious river traffic was a Casper jurisdiction issue, and I should focus on my own patrol zone." Caleb said nothing. "I had 3 separate reports," Tessa continued. "Quiet now. Timestamps, observations, partial plate numbers. They're gone. All 3. Gone from where? The department filing system. My personal copies." She met his eyes. "Someone went into my personnel file." Mercer came in 20 minutes later, moving carefully, one hand on the doorframe. He had the look of a man whose headache was too large to fit inside his expression. He shook Caleb's hand with the careful grip of someone whose entire body was one long bruise. "They told me you found us. The dog." "I'm going to buy that dog a steak," Noah said, and sat heavily on the edge of Tessa's bed. Caleb watched them. He saw the way they calibrated to each other, not romantically, but like partners who'd spent enough time in the same patrol car that they'd developed a shared shorthand. They were both scared, and neither one of them was willing to say it yet. It was fine. Fear was more useful when it was processed rather than announced. "Your car," Caleb said.
"Where was it found?"
Noah and Tessa exchanged a look. "It wasn't," Noah said. "Hasn't been located yet." "Who has access to the route assignment system?" "Senior dispatch shift supervisors," and Noah stopped. "And department command." The word hung there. Outside the hospital window, the sky had turned the flat white of an incoming front. More snow. Greyhaven would be locked in by nightfall, the valley roads would narrow, and whatever evidence remained at the bridge approach would be buried under 8 to 12 inches by morning. Caleb stood up. "Don't tell anyone you talked to me," he said. Tessa frowned. "Why?" "Because whoever changed your patrol route can check visitor logs." He picked up his jacket. "Give me 24 hours before you report this conversation to your department." Straightened. "That's 24 hours, Caleb said. "After that, do whatever you think is right." He was at the door when Tessa spoke. "Who are you exactly?" He paused with his hand on the frame. Didn't turn around. "Someone who recognizes the pattern," he said. And then he walked out into the white light of the corridor. He went back to the bridge at dusk. He knew it was probably being watched. He went anyway, but he went differently, parked 2 miles away at the pull-off near the state forestry access road, and walked in through the tree line rather than on the path. Koda moved silently beside him on a short lead, close in, the way Caleb had trained him for urban patrol work. The dog's ears rotated forward and back like radar dishes. Nothing alarming. Not yet. The crime scene tape had been put up orange and white, flagging in the wind, but the team had come and gone. The evidence markers were still in place, those small numbered yellow placards that departments set out and then photograph before collecting. Caleb counted 14 markers. He noted their positions relative to the bridge supports without stepping inside the tape boundary. What he was really there for was west of the tape. He moved along the riverbank, staying in the tree shadow, crouching when the open ground required it. Yes, he'd intervened. The wind was picking up of the front, and it was working in his favor, covering the sound of his movement, pushing his scent behind him. He let Koda work the area around the western embankment access road. The dog's nose went to the ground and tracked north along the bank for 30 meters before circling back to a patch of compressed snow near a cluster of willow roots. Caleb crouched beside him. The binding material was still there. Whoever had processed the scene had either missed it or dismissed it. He looked at it carefully without touching the cut end of a polyester webbing strap, approximately 3 inches wide with a ratchet load clasp still attached. Clasp had a part number stamped into the steel housing. He memorized it. He took photographs on his phone. 17 of them. Different angles, different distances. He photographed the tire impressions, which were already soft-edged from the wind, but still readable if you knew what to look for. He measured the tread width against his boot using a comparison method he'd been using since his second deployment. The wheelbase confirmed it. Whatever vehicle had been here wasn't a civilian truck. It was purpose-built for cargo, heavy cargo, and the track from the impressions ran directly northeast toward the Red Hollow Mill district. Caleb stood up in the dying light and looked northeast along the river. 3 miles, maybe 3.5. The mills had been decommissioned for 15 years. Access in vain. The access roads gated, but not blocked. The county had never gotten around to installing the concrete barriers the Planning Commission had approved in 2019, which meant the roads were technically closed and practically open. He had been planning to leave Greyhaven in 4 days. He and Lucy. He'd already told his neighbor, Mrs. Hadley, that he'd need her to hold his mail. He'd signed a lease on a smaller place in Sheridan, quieter, better school district for Lucy, further from everything. He'd been planning this for 3 months. The furniture orders could be transferred. The woodshop equipment could be loaded in a weekend. He stood at the edge of the frozen river in the near dark and felt the snow begin light, patient, indifferent, coming down around him. He thought about 2 police officers in hospital beds with someone's handprint still figuratively around their throats. Thought about altered reports and erased files and a patrol route that had been moved inside a system only command-level personnel could access. Thought about freight webbing. He thought of webbing with an industrial part number and tire impressions from a vehicle carrying something that wasn't supposed to exist in Greyhaven, Wyoming. And somewhere to the northeast, through 3 miles of frozen valley and silence, the Red Hollow Mills sat dark in the oncoming storm. Koda pressed his flank against Caleb's leg, not out of cold, out of the particular animal solidarity that dogs offer when they sense something in their person that isn't quite fear and isn't quite resolve, but sits somewhere in the difficult territory between. Caleb looked at the mills. Then he looked at his phone. 1 missed call, Mrs. Hadley, probably about something to do with Lucy. He'd call back from the car. He started walking. He'd been planning to leave. That plan had a problem now, because the tracks in the snow didn't go away from Greyhaven. They went through it. He was already back at the tree line when Koda stopped dead. The slow taper of alerting. The instant, total freeze nose forward, ears rigid, weight shifted to his haunches that the dog used for one specific category of threat. Close. Intentional. Caleb was behind a tree in the same second. Phone killed. Flashlight killed. Hand on nothing because he hadn't brought a weapon, and that was a calculation he was already reassessing. He stood completely still and listened. Wind. Snow. The low percussion of the frozen river. And then, 90, maybe 100 meters south along the bank, the brief flare of a light. A flashlight. Smaller. A phone screen, covered and uncovered in a fast check. Kind of move someone makes when they're trying to be discreet, but aren't quite disciplined enough to go dark entirely. 1 person, standing at the edge of the crime scene tape, standing exactly where Caleb had been 30 minutes ago, looking at the tire impressions, looking northeast. Caleb didn't move. He controlled his breathing, 4-count in, 4-count hold, 4-count out, and watched. The figure stood there for almost 2 full minutes, then moved back toward the access road with the careful, deliberate step of someone who'd been told not to be seen here. The light disappeared. An engine started, distant. Moved away. Koda exhaled that specific release that meant the threat had reduced, not eliminated. Caleb stayed behind the tree for another 5 minutes before he moved. Then he pulled out his phone and stared at the screen. He had a choice to make. He could call Noah, brief him, tell him someone had just conducted their own nighttime site assessment of an active police crime scene. He could call the department directly and watch it disappear into whatever system had already swallowed Tessa's reports. He could do nothing. He'd drive home, kiss his daughter's forehead while she slept, and let someone else sort this out. He looked northeast. The mills were invisible in the storm now. Just dark in the shape of mountains, the pale smear of clouds reflecting the valley's distant lights. Someone inside Greyhaven was protecting an operation, and that someone had just sent someone to the bridge in the dark to see if they'd missed anything. Question Caleb couldn't answer yet. The question that kept him standing in the snow for longer than was wise was whether what they were looking for was already gone, or whether they'd come to make sure it stayed buried. He stood in the snow for another full minute after the engine sound faded, running probability. Whoever that was, they hadn't been processing the scene the way investigators do methodically, lighting the whole area in a pattern. They'd gone straight to the tire impressions, straight to the one piece of evidence that pointed northeast, which meant they already knew what they were looking for, which meant they'd been there before. Caleb walked back to his truck through the tree line, Koda tight at his left. The snow was coming harder now, wind kicking off the canyon walls and driving it sideways. By morning, the entire riverbank would be under 8 inches of fresh cover, and the tire impressions would be gone as completely as if they'd never existed. That was either luck or planning on someone's part, and Caleb had stopped believing in luck sometime around his 3rd deployment. He sat in the truck cab without starting the engine and stared at the rearview mirror. Empty road, just falling snow in the red wash of his taillights. He had the part number memorized, the clasp on the polyester webbing stamped steel, 6 digits, the kind of inventory code that traced back to a manufacturer or a bulk supplier. He had 17 photographs. He had tire impression measurements stored in his head, and the bearing of the tracks burned in like a compass heading. He had 2 hospitalized officers, and a figure in the dark who'd just told him, without meaning to, that the people responsible for what happened under that bridge were still actively managing the scene. He started the engine and drove home. Mrs. Hadley's voicemail turned out to be about Lucy's science project, which needed a cardboard tube and 3 rubber bands by Thursday. Called her back, confirmed he had both, and thanked her for watching Lucy during the afternoon. He made dinner pasta, the simple kind, because he was tired, and it was what Lucy wanted, and they ate at the kitchen table while she told him about something that had happened at recess involving a girl named Priya and a misunderstanding about a jump rope. He listened to every word. He asked the right questions. He was present in the way that required real effort when part of his mind was still walking the east bank of the Harrow River in the dark. After Lucy was asleep, he sat at the table with a cold cup of coffee and his phone and pulled up the Wyoming Business Registry, the county property records, and 3 different freight logistics databases he still had login credentials for from a consulting job they'd done 2 years ago that he'd never discussed with anyone in Greyhaven. Red Hollow Mill District, 15 parcels, 12 registered to a holding company called Linwood Basin Properties LLC, incorporated in Delaware, which was the first flagged Delaware incorporation for a Wyoming industrial property. Almost always meant someone wanted distance between the asset and the owner. The registered agent was a law firm in Cheyenne. The managing member was listed as a trust. He stared at that for a while. The other 3 parcels were county-owned decommissioned infrastructure, the access roads, and loading docks, which meant anyone using the mill complex would be moving through county-maintained roads to reach a privately held facility with a deliberately obscured ownership chain. Cross-reference the freight webbing part number against 2 supplier databases. Came back to a company called Tier 1 Cargo Solutions, based in Denver, with distribution accounts across 6 western states. Commercial clients only. Minimum order quantities that ruled out a small operator. This was someone who bought in volume. He wrote nothing down. Everything stayed in his head, the way it always had. At 11:15, he closed the laptop and went to bed. He was asleep in 4 minutes, not because he wasn't worried, but because he'd trained himself to sleep on command, and his body had stopped arguing about it years ago. His alarm went off at 5. He ran the same route. This time he didn't go to the bridge. He went northeast. The Red Hollow access road was gated with a standard county padlock and a weather-beaten sign that read Restricted Area No Trespassing Greyhaven County, DEP. Infrastructure. The chain was clean. Not the lock a padlock that's been exposed to Wyoming winters for any significant period develops rust in the shackle groove and oxidation on the body. This one was clean on the body and showed only surface weathering on the shackle. Someone had replaced it recently. Not county infrastructure, they used a specific brand with a yellow dust cap that he'd seen on every other county gate in the area. This was a different brand entirely. He didn't touch it. He walked the fence line north for 200 meters and looked at the perimeter from outside. The mills were large 4 main structures, a series of loading bays on the eastern face, 2 elevated conveyor housings that had partially collapsed but still provided significant cover from aerial observation. The access road ran through the middle of the complex and dead-ended at what had been the primary loading dock. From the outsides, in the gray pre-dawn with fresh snow on every surface, the place looked exactly like what it was supposed to be, an abandoned industrial facility slowly losing its argument with weather and time. But the snow on the access road inside the gate was tracked. Heavily, not carelessly, just enough. Caleb measured the track width with his eyes against the gatepost spacing. Same tread profile as the impressions by the bridge. He turned around and ran home. He called Tessa Rowe at 8:30. She answered on the second ring, which meant she'd been awake for a while. Caleb, I know. I saved your number. How are you feeling? Like someone dislocated my shoulder. A pause. What did you find? I need to ask you something first. Your encrypted backups, the ones you mentioned yesterday. Where are they? Silence. Then external drive. At my apartment. Is your apartment secure? Another pause. Longer. You think someone would... I think someone went into your department files. I think someone altered a patrol assignment at the command level. I think someone was at the bridge site last night, after the scene had been processed, specifically examining the tire impressions from a vehicle that matches the one you followed to Red Hollow. He kept his voice flat. Not to intimidate, because flat was how this kind of information needed to be delivered. He'd assume, I think you should assume that anything connected to this investigation is potentially accessible to whoever is running it. He heard her breathing change, not panic, processing. I have a neighbor, she said finally. She has a key. I can call her. Don't have her move it. Just confirm it's there. If it's been touched, I need to know. What are you exactly? Not aggressive. Genuine. Ugh. Someone who recognizes the pattern, he said, and realized he'd said the same thing yesterday, and that it still wasn't an answer, and that she knew it. Yes. That's not... I'll explain more when I can do it in person. Is Mercer being released today? Tomorrow morning, they said. I need both of you somewhere that isn't your apartments and isn't connected to the department. Can you do that? He could almost hear her weighing it, the professional caution against the very reasonable fear of a woman who'd nearly frozen to death under a bridge, while her own department's files disappeared around her. Yes, she said. I'll find a location and call you back. He hung up and stood at his kitchen window for a moment, looking at the back field, where Koda was running perimeter checks along the fence line, the dog's dark shape moving against the white ground, with that easy, efficient lope that covered ground without appearing to hurry. He thought about the Sheridan lease, the cardboard tube for Lucy's science project, the furniture orders he needed to transfer. Then he picked up his phone and started making different calls. The location he found was a county maintenance cabin, 8 miles up the valley, a property he knew about because he'd done a custom shelving installation for the county facilities manager 14 months ago, and the man had given him an access code as payment for a scheduling favor. The cabin was used in spring and summer for road maintenance crews, sat empty in winter, and had a wood stove, running water, no connection to the department's system or the town's camera network. He drove out there mid-morning to check it. The access code still worked. The stove took 3 minutes to catch. He split enough wood from the pile behind the structure to lades, stacked it inside, and drove back to town. Mercer got released the following morning at 7:40. Caleb picked him up outside the hospital not because Noah had asked him to, but because he'd called the night before and made the case in about 45 seconds. And Noah, who had a concussion and a compromised department and nowhere obvious to go, had said yes without much argument. Tessa was already at the cabin when they arrived. She'd driven herself one-handed, which she acknowledged was probably not advisable and clearly didn't care about. She'd brought her external drive, a laptop, 2 days' worth of food in a grocery bag, and an expression that said she'd spent the night getting progressively angrier and had arrived somewhere on the other side of it, past the fear, into the specific cold clarity that people reach when they've decided to stop waiting for someone else to fix the problem. The three of them sat around the table while the wood stove worked through its first load. The maps were Caleb's. He'd printed them before leaving the house, county parcel records overlaid on topographic, with the mill complex and the river access road marked. Spread them on the table without ceremony. "Tell me everything," he said. "Both of you. From the beginning. Not the report version. The actual version." Noah looked at Tessa. Tessa looked at the maps. She went first. It had started 6 weeks ago, with a call she'd taken on a routine patrol near the Harrow River boat launch, a local fisherman named Dale Cutter, who'd said he'd seen lights on the river past midnight, which wasn't unusual in summer, but was unusual in the frozen dead of February. She'd logged it, run a drive-by, seen nothing, and filed a standard observation report. 3 days later, she'd gone back to reference that report for a follow-up call and found it missing from the system. Archived. Not transferred. Gone. She'd filed another one. That one disappeared within 48 hours. "I printed the third one," she said. "Kept a copy at home. Filed the digital version, and then went back and photographed the screen before I closed out." She pulled up something on her laptop, a photograph of a monitor, slightly angled, showing a time-stamped entry in the department's record system. 4 hours after I filed it, the digital version was gone. But I had the photo. Noah leaned in. Even with the concussion still sitting behind his eyes, he was tracking carefully. "Who has deletion access?" Caleb asked. "No one below shift supervisor level." In practice stopped. Rubbed the side of his head carefully. "Command has what's called administrative override. Supposed to be for database maintenance, expunging records after court-ordered seals, stuff like that." "Who in command?" Noah and Tessa exchanged a look that carried weight. "Deputy Chief Pike," Tessa said, "and the chief himself. But the chief's been on medical leave for 6 weeks." "Warren Pike," Caleb filed the name. He hadn't interacted with Pike directly, but he'd seen him, a tall man, late 50s, salt and pepper, the particular confident bearing of someone who'd spent decades being the most senior person in any room he entered. He'd been at the hospital briefly the morning after the attack, Caleb recalled. Spoken to the attending physician, shaken hands with the responding supervisor, and left without speaking to either injured officer. At the time, Caleb had noted it as slightly odd. Now it meant something different. "What did you actually see on the river?" he asked Tessa. She pulled up her encrypted backup. The drive was a small black rectangle, military-grade encryption, the kind that required a specific passphrase and wiped itself after 5 failed attempts. She connected it to her laptop. 3 separate nights. Lights moving south to north on the river ice. Not vehicles, the river's too frozen for that. But something was using the ice as a corridor. The lights moved in a line, spaced too evenly to be random. She brought up the photographs, dark, grainy, taken from the river access road with a phone camera at distance, but clear enough to show what she meant. A series of lights, roughly 4 to 5 meters apart, moving in formation across the frozen surface. Whoever was moving something, they were moving it in stages. Relay system, maybe. Small loads, multiple trips. Caleb looked at the photographs. His jaw tightened slightly. Relay logistics, he said. You break up the cargo and move it in increments small enough that any one intercept doesn't take down the whole load. Each carrier has a limited view of the overall operation. He tapped the photograph. This isn't improvised. Someone designed this. Noah was quiet for a moment. What kind of operation needs that level of operational security in a town of 6,000 people? Kind that knows it's operating in a compromised environment. Caleb looked at the map, using the river ice as a transit corridor, because it doesn't show tire tracks the same way the roads do. Come spring, it all melts. Clean. The mills at Red Hollow are the terminus, a staging area with cover, with obscured ownership, with road access that's technically closed to the public. He paused. And they have someone inside the department who can erase the paper trail and redirect patrol routes away from the corridor. The wood stove crackled. Snow tapped against the single window. Pike, So said. It wasn't a question. I don't know that yet, Caleb said. Assume the name before you have the evidence. That's how you end up looking at the wrong person while the right one watches you. He looked at both of them. What else is on that drive? Tessa had been scrolling. She stopped. The rude alteration, she said, slowly, her voice shifting register. Pulled it before they could wipe it. I didn't think I'd gotten it, but she turned the laptop so Caleb could see T. Timestamp system log entry. A patrol route modification for Unit 7 Noah and Tessa's unit logged at 11:47 p.m. the night of the attack. Assigned previously to Route 12. Changed to the Harrow River Access Road. The modification was logged under a user ID. The user ID resolved to a name. Pike admin override. The 3 of them sat with that for a moment. Outside, the wind hit the cabin wall, with a sound like someone leaning their weight against it. Stove ticked. Noah stared at the screen with the particular stillness of a man whose worldview is being restructured in real time, and who isn't sure he has enough room to hold what's coming. He sent us there, Noah said, voice flat, not loud. He changed the route and then, we don't know who gave the order to attack, Caleb said. Who moved you into position? He kept his voice level because he needed them level. Log entry is everything, but only if it gets out intact. If it stays on that drive and that drive stays in this room, it's worthless. We need to take this to the state, Tessa said, eventually. But if Pike has contacts at the state level, if this operation is as organized as the evidence suggests, you walk into a state office with this, and you could be walking it directly to someone. Connected to the same network. Caleb looked at the drive. We need redundancy. Copies in locations that aren't connected to either of you or to the department. Once the information is in enough independent places that suppressing it becomes logistically impossible, then you go to the state. Rubbed the side of his head again. He'd been doing it every few minutes, not a nervous habit, Caleb recognized, but the unconscious response to a headache that wasn't going away. An awful lot about operational security. For a furniture maker, Noah said. Caleb looked at him. You make custom furniture, Noah said. That's what people say. You've been in Greyhaven 18 months, and you run in the morning, and you have a daughter at Birchwood, and a German shepherd and a woodshop. He wasn't being hostile. He was being precise. And you walked into this situation, and within 48 hours, you're talking about relay logistics and route corridors and redundant information channels. He paused. Who are you? The fire popped. A log shifted. Tessa had closed her laptop and was watching Caleb with the same question in her face that Noah had just put into words, except she'd been sitting with it longer, and it had gone quieter in her. The way questions do when you already suspect the answer and you're just waiting for the shape of it to confirm what you know. Caleb looked at the map on the table. Someone who has done this before, he said. In places where the stakes were higher and the extraction window was shorter and there was no one to call. That's not a biography, Noah said. No, Caleb agreed. It's not. He stood up and moved to the window. The valley below was white and still, the storm from the night before having deposited another 6 inches on top of the existing cover. The access road to the cabin was already drifting closed behind them. It meant their tracks were going, too. What I'm going to tell you, he said, stays in this room. Because I'm protecting myself. Because the fewer people who know my background, the less useful it is as leverage against us. He turned. I was Navy. Special operations. Multiple deployments, multiple theaters. I got out 8 years ago. I moved to Greyhaven because it was small and it was quiet and it was the kind of place where a man can raise a daughter without the past following him into the elementary school pickup line. He paused. That's the whole story. Noah was quiet. Then SEAL? Another pause. Noah looked at Tessa. She looked at the table. Something passed between them that wasn't quite relief and wasn't quite awe, more like the exhale that comes when a thing you've been half-sensing finally becomes solid. Okay, Noah said. Okay, Tessa said. That was all. Caleb had expected more questions, more resistance, the particular friction that comes when civilians recalibrate their understanding of a person they thought they knew. These two were cops. They worked with imperfect information under pressure, every shift. They understood that sometimes you just had to accept the revised picture and move. He respected them for it. The drive, Caleb said. I want copies made in the next 2 hours. 3 separate encrypted copies, different storage media, different locations. Who do you trust outside the department? Not colleagues. Anyone with a department connection. Tessa thought. My sister in Laramie. Does she have a secure connection? She's an IT security analyst. Good. Who else? Noah said, I have a former training officer. Retired. Lives in Koda. He's got no connection to Greyhaven at all. Contact them both. Don't explain on the phone. Just tell them you need them to hold something important and not to discuss it with anyone. Frame it as personal, not professional. Caleb looked at them. Once those copies are out, we have more room to move. He was about to say something else when Koda, who had been lying near the stove, lifted his head. Yet, fast, not alarmed, but with that specific shift of attention that Caleb had learned to treat as seriously as a radar warning system. The dog's ears went forward. His nose lifted. His eyes moved to the door. And then, in the silence of the snowbound valley, Caleb heard what Koda had already heard, the distant, barely their sound of a vehicle on the road below the cabin. And slowly, not a plow, the tempo was wrong. Not a county truck, it was too quiet, too deliberate. The sound of an engine being held at low RPM on purpose, the way you drive when you're trying not to announce yourself. Caleb moved to the window, praying without touching the frame or the curtain, staying lateral, the way you look when you don't want to be a silhouette. A dark SUV was moving up the valley road. It wasn't heading for the cabin, the turnoff was another half-mile up, but it was moving at the speed of a vehicle whose driver was paying very specific attention to the landscape around him. Kill the laptop, he said quietly. Tessa closed it. Move from where you are. Caleb watched the SUV. Continued past the turnoff. Didn't slow for the cabin road. Kept moving north. He watched it until it disappeared around the tree-line bend. He stayed at the window for another full minute. False alarm? Noah asked. Caleb didn't answer immediately. He was thinking about the figure at the bridge last night and the clean padlock on the red hollow gate and the system log with Pike's user ID at 11:47 p.m. and the particular calculated silence of an operation that had successfully erased itself twice before. The drive, he said. Now, before we do anything else. He turned from the window and looked at both of them, and something in his face, not alarm, not fear, but the particular settled hardness of a man shifting from assessment to action, made Noah straighten and Tessa sit forward without him having to explain why. We need to assume, Caleb said carefully, that someone already knows we're meeting. He crossed to the wood stove and crouched beside it. And that was when Koda crossed to the stack of firewood along the northern wall and began scratching at the base of it, and insistent, the way the dog did when he'd found something that didn't belong in the landscape he'd already mapped in his mind. Caleb looked at the firewood, looked at Koda, stood up, moved to the woodpile and began pulling logs off the stack one by one, setting them aside without sound, until the bottom layer was exposed and he could see, pressed flat against the cabin's baseboard, behind where the wood had been resting, a device roughly the size of a deck of cards, matte, black, with a single LED indicator that pulsed barely visible, once every 4 seconds in deep red. Tracking transmitter. Live. He looked at it for exactly 3 seconds and did not touch it. He looked at the door, and at Tessa, and at Noah, and he said with a quiet that was worse than shouting, "We've got maybe 10 minutes. Possibly less. Whatever you're not willing to leave behind, you pick up right now." But he moved for a half second that felt much longer than that. Then Caleb said, "Go," and the word landed like a starting gun. Tessa was already grabbing the laptop with her good arm, tucking it under her sling side, awkwardly, shoulder, twisting in a way that made her jaw clench but produced no sound. Had the drive off the table and into his jacket pocket. Caleb took one last look at the transmitter behind the firewood, still pulsing, 4-second intervals, patient and indifferent, and left it exactly where it was. Moving it would change the signal pattern. Whoever was monitoring the other end would notice an interruption or a displacement. Better to let it keep broadcasting from an empty room. He crossed to the stove and shut the damp down to its lowest setting. The fire wouldn't go out immediately, but it would drop. He wanted the cabin to look occupied for as long as possible from a thermal perspective, because if whoever was had any kind of equipment worth worrying about, a dead cold cabin would tell the story before they reached the door. "My truck," he said, "single file. Stay close to the tree line on the north side, not the road. My car is parked at the..." Tessa started. "I know where it is." She stopped arguing and moved. They went out the back door, which opened onto a narrow drainage cut between the cabin and the tree line. Caleb pulled the door mostly closed behind them, not latched, because a latched door on a cold day created a specific sound when it released that carried further than people expected. He moved them into the trees immediately. Koda pressing in tight on it without being told, the dog reading the energy of the group and adjusting accordingly. The snow was deep enough that every step cost something. Impassable but slow, and slow was a problem when the clock was running without a visible display. Cassie didn't think. Caleb estimated them transmitter and had been active long enough to have already confirmed their location. The question was whether the response was a scout or a full response, and whether that SUV he'd seen from the window was coincidence or advanced surveillance. Yes, he didn't have answers to either question, which meant he operated on the assumption that made him most careful. His truck was parked 200 meters from the cabin, tucked into a logging spur that was invisible from the main valley road. Parked there deliberately, it was the same calculation he made every time he went anywhere in Greyhaven anymore, the leftover math of a life where parking in obvious places had occasionally resulted in obvious problems. They reached it in 4 minutes, felt like 12. He got them in Noah in the passenger seat, Tessa in the back with Koda, and started the engine and pulled out of the spur without turning the headlights on. The sky was bright enough from the snow cover to drive by at low speed, and headlights at this distance would be visible from the valley road a full minute before the truck reached the junction. He reached the junction and stopped, looked both ways. The road was empty in both directions, the valley running white and still in the flat winter light. Dust. No exhaust vapor hanging in the air, no silhouette on the ridgeline. Nothing that he could see. He turned south and kept the speed at 40, which was wrong for the road conditions, and wrong condition. If that was better than what would happen if that SUV came around the northern bend and had a clear sight line on them. "Where are we going?" Noah asked. "Somewhere with a phone signal and an outside connection," Caleb said. "You need to call your contact in Koda right now. And tell him you're sending him something in the next 30 minutes. Say what? Just tell him to be ready. With what? The drive's encrypted. Tessa's sister can break it into a format she can transmit securely. How fast can she do that? From the back seat, if I walk her through the passphrase, 20 minutes. Then she goes first. Caleb checked the mirror. Nothing behind them yet. Make the calls when I stop. Not moving, not on this road. He drove in silence for the next 3 miles. The valley road connected to State Route 44, about 4 miles south of the cabin, and State 44 was a real road plowed, salted, with gas stations and the kind of ambient traffic that made any single vehicle invisible. Once they were on it, the situation changed. Tessa made her call from the back seat while they were still on the valley road, which was not what he'd said, but he let it go because she kept her voice low, and the content was clean. She said she needed her sister to be at her computer. She said she was fine. She said she'd explain later. She said it with a careful, specific tone of someone who had already thought about what to say and what not to say, and Caleb acknowledged that internally without comment. They hit Route 44 at 9:53 in the morning. He pulled into his gas station 3 miles south. It had a parking lot that faced the road from 2 angles, and the station building itself provided a visual block against the northern approach. He'd been in this station 4 times. He knew the layout. Parked where he wanted to park. Okay, he said. Make the calls. Both of you. While they made their calls, Caleb got out and stood at the front of the truck and looked north. Wind came off the mountains behind the station and pushed through the gap in his jacket at the collar. He didn't move to close it. The SUV was not on the road. Nothing was on the road except a county snowplow heading south and a white pickup hauling a horse trailer. The specific normal of a Wyoming winter morning that wasn't covering for anything, just existing. He bought 3 coffees from the station and brought them back. But he asked for it. Nobody thanked him, which was fine. We're both on their calls. Noah finished first. He took the coffee and wrapped both hands around it and stared at the dashboard for a moment. "It's ready," he said. "Cody contact. He'll take whatever I sent." Tessa finished a minute later. "My sister's on. She needs me to walk her through the passphrase structure so she can prep the receiving end." "Do it." She and Caleb took the drive into the station side entry, a narrow alcove out of the wind, and she worked through the technical setup with her sister, while Caleb watched the road. It took 18 minutes. When it was done, she had a confirmation from her sister that the initial file package had been received and was secure. "She's good," Tessa said, and the simple sentence carried more in it than the 2 words. They drove to a diner on the south edge of Greyhaven, a place called Birch Knoll Family Restaurant, which had been open since 1987 and had the kind of interior that hadn't changed since then either. Vinyl booths, laminate tables, coffee machine that had probably seen more trouble than it had any right to have survived. Caleb chose a corner booth with sight lines on both the entrance and the parking lot, and they ordered without looking at the menus because none of them were there for the food. "Put it on the table first. We need to go to Pike directly," he said. "Confront him with what we have, before he knows that we know." Caleb wrapped his hands around his coffee mug and did not immediately respond, which was a response in itself. "He already knows we're talking," Tessa said. "The transmitter. Transmitter told him we were meeting. It didn't tell him what we found." Noah leaned forward. "If we hit him now, fast, before he's had time to." Caleb said. Noah stopped. "Going at him directly right now does one thing," Caleb said. "Tells him exactly what evidence we have, how we have it, and who else knows. It gives him time to call whoever is above him in this operation and seal the corridor. Complex gets cleaned out overnight. The ownership documentation gets transferred through another layer of LLC structure, and we're back to nothing." He set the mug down. "The transmitter told them we're a group. It did not tell them what the group knows. That's leverage. Don't spend it. So we just wait?" Noah's voice had an edge to it that wasn't anger exactly, more the particular frustration of a man who wants to act and has just been told to hold. "While Pike is out there managing whatever is happening at Red Hollow, and our careers are. Your careers are already protected by what Tessa transmitted this morning, Caleb said. The log entry with Pike's user ID at 11:47 is in Laramie and Cody right now. It exists outside this town. Pike can't erase it anymore. He looked at Noah directly. Physical evidence at Red Hollow can still be moved. Cargo, the equipment, whatever they're staging there, it can be gone in 12 hours if the right person makes the right call. We need federal eyes on that facility before anyone inside this department has a chance to warn them. How do we get federal eyes on it without going through? Tessa's sister sends the log entry to the Wyoming Division of Criminal Investigation. Local, state level, but the division specifically handles law enforcement corruption. Simultaneously contact in Koda. You said he was a retired training officer. Does he have any federal contacts? He spent 15 years as a deputy U.S. Marshal before he moved to county, Noah said. Looked at him. Yes, Noah said quietly, he has federal contacts. That's the call you're making after breakfast. To Pike, not to your department. To a retired federal officer in Cody who can reach people who don't have a phone on Pike's desk 2 floors above them. The diner was warming up around them, the late morning breakfast crowd, thinning into the mid-morning coffee crowd. A woman in a booth across the aisle was helping a toddler with a juice box with the focused patience of someone who had done this many times. A man at the counter was reading a newspaper with his back to the room. The ordinary machinery of a Tuesday morning. Tessa had been quiet for a few minutes. She was looking at her coffee. Then she looked up. The night it happened, she said, right before we were diverted to the river access road. You remember that call on the radio? Noah frowned. Which, the one that came in about 3 minutes before dispatch confirmed our new route. Someone called in a disturbance on the east side, and dispatch routed us around it. She was connecting something in real time. He could see it in her face. There was no disturbance. We found that out 2 days later when I tried to pull the call record. The record was there, but the caller ID came back as a spoofed number. A ghost call. Someone called in a fake disturbance specifically to have us rerouted, and whoever did it had access to a spoofed line That's not an individual, Caleb said. That's infrastructure. She nodded, which means this isn't just Pike acting alone. The 3 of them sat with that for a moment. The toddler, across the aisle, laughed suddenly at something. No, loud and unself-conscious, and the sound was so specifically ordinary that it seemed to come from a different frequency entirely. An operation with spoofed radio capability, command-level database access, an industrial freight network, and a staging facility with obscured ownership. Town of 6,000 people in the Wyoming mountains. Caleb had seen the shape of this before, not in Greyhaven. In places where the geography was different, and the weather was hotter, and the language was not English. The logistics were the same. The methodology was the same. Part that was different was that the people being protected by the organization were not foreign assets or political actors. They were supposed to be law enforcement. That made it worse, in a specific way that he hadn't fully articulated to himself until now, sitting in a vinyl booth with 2 damaged police officers and a cold coffee and a dog under the table with his head on Caleb's boot. Make the calls, Caleb said. I need to handle something this afternoon. Can both of you stay somewhere together tonight? Somewhere you haven't been before. Pay cash. I have camping money in my wallet, Tessa said, which was a slightly absurd sentence, and she seemed to know it because something passed across her face that was almost a smile. There's a motel off 44 called the Ridgecrest, Noah said. Family owned. Cash register at the front desk, no digital check-in. Go there. Accept the contacts you already have in motion. Department channels for anything. Caleb slid out of the booth. I'll find you tonight. What are you doing this afternoon? Noah asked. Running down one more piece. That's not an answer. Left a 20 on the table and took Koda out through the diner's side door into the parking lot. The air hit him clean and cold, and he stood beside the truck for a moment, with his hand on the door handle and looked at the sky. Flat white, the way it got, when more weather was building somewhere above the visible ceiling. The clouds too high and too uniform to read individually. He thought about the part number on the freight webbing clasp. He'd run it through 2 databases the night before the cabin meeting and gotten a supplier name. Tier 1 Cargo Solutions in Denver. He hadn't gone further than that because he'd run out of time. He had a few hours and a specific question: who manufactured the strap? Who in Wyoming had a commercial account with that supplier? Accounts at that purchasing level had minimum order requirements that created paper. Paper that went somewhere. He drove to the library. The Greyhaven Public Library was a small building on Cedar Street that had the specific atmosphere of a place that took itself more seriously than its square footage justified. Note, which Caleb considered a kind of institutional integrity. He used the public terminal in the back corner, not his phone, his laptop, and spent 45 minutes working through the available supplier, database and business registry, cross-references with the methodical patience of someone who had once spent 11 hours in a cold observation post, waiting for a 2-minute window. What he found was not Tier 1's full client list, which was proprietary and unavailable. What he found was a Wyoming business filing for a freight logistics partnership, a limited liability entity called High Basin Transport Group, registered 18 months ago, with principal address in Greyhaven, and a registered agent who was a different attorney at the same Cheyenne law firm that represented Linwood Basin Properties, the holding company that owned the Red Hollow Mill parcels. Same attorney, different entities, connected at the registration level. He printed the filing, folded it into his jacket, and was back in the truck by 2:15. He stopped at his house, went inside, checked that the alarm he'd set a simple contact system. Nothing sophisticated. Just the kind of thing that told him if a door or window had been opened in his absence was still in its original state. It was. He changed his jacket for a heavier one, put a protein bar and 2 water bottles in his bag, and stood in Lucy's room for a moment without turning the light on. Her drawings were on the desk. 3 of them. One was a horse, one was Koda, one was something that might have been either a rocket ship or a very enthusiastic tree. They were tacked to the corkboard she'd asked him to hang above the desk in October. He looked at them for about 15 seconds. Then he left. He drove to the northern edge of town, where the commercial strip thinned out and became the light industrial cluster, a propane supplier, 2 auto repair shops, a fencing company, and at the far end of the access road, a freight and storage company called Valley Distribution. He'd passed it 40 or 50 times. He'd never had a reason to stop. He stopped now, not at the entrance. He parked on the parallel service road and walked the fence line, Koda on lead, the way he'd walked the red hollow perimeter from the outside, taking in dimensions and access points and the kind of contextual details that only made sense once you started looking for them. Valley Distribution had 2 loading bays. One was active, a box truck parked with its rear against the dock, a man in a yellow safety vest operating a pallet jack with the focused efficiency of someone running behind schedule. The other bay was closed, the dock door down, no activity. But there was a vehicle parked at the far end of the facility's rear lot that did not belong to the operational footprint of a standard distribution company. It was a flatbed truck, long, heavy axle, the kind used for oversized freight. The tires were wide enough that their tread profile matched the measurements he'd taken at the river access road, within the margin of his boot comparison method. He didn't stare. He walked past, looked ahead, looked at Koda, looked like a man walking his dog past an industrial lot, which was exactly what he was from any camera angle. He noted what he needed to note and kept moving. At the end of the service road, he stopped and turned back, the way any person walking a dog would. Gave himself 6 seconds of open observation. The flatbed had a load restraint system on the cargo rails, polyester ratchet clasp type. From this distance, he couldn't read the part number. He didn't need to. The clasp housing profile matched. Turned around and walked back to the truck. He was putting Koda in the back seat when his phone went off. Call. A text from a number he didn't recognize, which, in Caleb's world, was either nothing or everything, and the message was 2 words. We know. He sat in the driver's seat and looked at the phone screen and felt something cold settle through his chest. That wasn't the temperature. Where he'd been, they know what he was doing. Or they wanted him to think they knew, which was a different play, but one that required the same response in the short term. Assume it's true and move accordingly. He texted back nothing, because responding confirmed the number was active and he wasn't giving them that. He drove to Birchwood Elementary. He was at the pickup line at 3:15, one car back from the front, when Lucy came through the glass doors with her backpack and her coat half-zipped and her hair doing the thing it did after a full day of school, where it committed fully to one side of her head. She spotted the truck, and her face opened up the way children's faces do when they see the person they're most glad to see. And it was the only moment all day that Caleb felt something loosen in his chest. She climbed in, and Koda's head immediately appeared between the front seats, and she grabbed his ears gently and said, "Hi, Koda," with the particular soft voice she reserved specifically for the dog. "Good day?" Caleb asked. "Medium," she said. "Pri and I are okay now. Can we get soup for dinner?" "Yeah." He drove home via a route that added 10 minutes. Force of habit. The text was still on his phone screen, and he'd made a decision about it during the drive to school. He was going to tell Noah and Tessa tonight. Both of them needed to know that whoever was running this operation had a phone number they'd use to contact him directly, which meant they had his personal cell, which meant they had access to carrier-level information, or had pulled his number from somewhere he'd given it in Greyhaven. The short list of places he'd given his number in Greyhaven: the school, the hospital, he'd summoned the county facilities office, and the Greyhaven Police Department, when Supervisor Greer had taken his statement 3 days ago. He made soup. Lucy did homework at the kitchen table. Koda lay under the table near her feet. Kitchen light was the warm yellow kind that the previous tenants had left behind, and that Caleb had never gotten around to replacing because it was, without him consciously deciding so, one of the better things about living there. At 7, he called Mrs. Hadley and asked if Lucy could sleep over. He told her there was some work he needed to finish and didn't know how late it would run. Mrs. Hadley said, of course. She'd been hoping to show Lucy the new puzzle anyway, come anytime. He drove Lucy over at 7:30. So, Lucy, who was perceptive the way children are, who've grown up with a parent who communicates mostly through action rather than announcement, looked at him in Mrs. Hadley's doorway with the specific evaluating look she'd had since she was about 5. "You're not doing furniture stuff tonight," she said. He crouched down to her level. "I'm handling some things. It's nothing for you to worry about." "I'm not worried," she said. He kissed her forehead and stood up. "I'll be there in the morning." "Okay." She turned to go inside, then stopped. "Yeah, don't be stupid." He looked at his 8-year-old daughter and felt the exact specific feeling that had no single name in the English language, but that every parent of a perceptive child knows intimately equal parts love and accountability. "I won't," he said. He drove to the Ridgecrest Motel, opened the door on the second knock, still in his jacket, the concussion headache visible in the careful way he held his head. Tessa was at the small table with her laptop open, a foam cup of something hot steaming beside the keyboard. Caleb came in, closed the door, and showed them the text. Tessa read it twice. Noah read it once and looked at Caleb's face and looked at the text again. "When did this come in?" Tessa asked. "This afternoon, while I was at Valley Distribution." He told them what he'd found there: the flatbed, the webbing, this business registry connection between High Basin Transport and Linwood Basin Properties, and the same Cheyenne law firm. "That's the network," Noah said. The headache was still there, but he was focused. The way people get when a shape they've been sensing starts to take definite form. Valley Distribution is the local logistics arm. Red Hollow is the staging facility. High Basin Transport is the paper entity that moves the money. And Pike is the protection layer, Tessa said. He keeps patrol routes off the corridor. He erases the reports, he redirects the complaints. She closed her laptop and looked at Caleb. "What do we do about the text?" "We let it tell us what it's telling us," Caleb said. which is that they want us to know they can reach us directly. That's an intimidation move, not an operational one. If they wanted to stop us, they'd have stopped us. What they want is for us to pull back. They want us in one place, Noah said. The room got quiet for a moment. Your federal contact in Koda, Caleb said. Did you reach him? He made 2 calls this afternoon. He said the Division of Criminal Investigation received Tessa's transmission and flagged it immediately. He said the word he got back was, Noah paused. He said they're mobilizing tonight. Caleb repeated. He wasn't specific, but he said to stay out of the corridor and stay off the radio. Caleb stood in the middle of the motel room and processed that. If the DCI was moving tonight, it meant the log entry had been enough to trigger an emergency response, which meant someone in the state system had already been watching Greyhaven. Or someone in the state system had connections to the federal layer that could move fast. Meant the evidence was doing what it needed to do. It also meant the window, before something happened, was not days anymore. It was hours. He looked at his watch. 9:41 p.m. Outside, the wind had picked up again off the mountains, pushing against the motel's aluminum siding with the low, persistent rhythm of a storm settling in for the night. Somewhere on the road outside, a truck passed, its engine sound Doppler shifting south, and then it was gone, and there was just the wind. Tessa was watching him. You're thinking they're going to move the cargo tonight, she said. Before the DCI gets there. If someone inside the state system is connected to this operation, yes. The moment the DCI logged that transmission, a clock started that someone in this network can hear ticking. He looked at the window, at the dark parking lot beyond the thin curtain. Try to clear Red Hollow before morning. Then we need to stay here, Caleb said, all 3 of us. In this room, off the road. He said it with a clarity that left no room for negotiation, and he looked at both of them to make sure they understood it was not a suggestion. The DCI moves on Red Hollow. They do it with warrant authority and backup, and the ability to secure the scene legally. If we're at the mill when they arrive, we are in the way at best, and we are suspects at worst. Nodded slowly. The headache was wearing on him, and Caleb could see him making the calculation between what he wanted to do and what made sense. Pike? Noah asked. He's not going anywhere tonight. He's either managing the clearance operation from inside the department, which means he's trapped by his own position, or he already knows the DCI is moving, and he's trying to figure out his exposure, which also means he's not going anywhere. Tessa pulled her knees up on the bed and wrapped both arms around them, the sling making the motion awkward on her right side. She looked tired in the specific way of someone who has been frightened, and then focused, and then frightened again, over the course of several days, and the adrenaline has stopped arriving on time. What if the DCI doesn't get there before they clear it? She said quietly. We have the log entry and the business registry connections, and your photographs, and the report records, Caleb said. It's not nothing. It's not enough to put Pike in a cell. He said, it's not. She looked at the window. The wind pushed at the siding again. Koda had settled near the door, not on guard exactly, but with the comfortable vigilance of an animal who had decided this was the perimeter, and was prepared to take that seriously. Try to sleep, Caleb said. Both of you. What about you? Tessa asked. Pulled the chair from the table and set it with its back to the wall, between the door and the window, and sat down in it, his jacket still on. I'm fine, he said. She looked at him for a moment at the chair against the wall, at the angle he'd positioned himself, the very specific posture of someone who had spent a lot of nights sitting in chairs between doors and windows in rooms that weren't safe, and she didn't say anything else. She lay down and pulled the blanket up. Noah was out in under 10 minutes, the concussion medication finally pulling him under. Caleb sat in the chair and watched the curtain and listened to the wind and thought about Red Hollow in the dark, 3 miles northeast, and whatever was moving through it tonight, by vehicle light or no light at all. And the question he couldn't stop turning over, whether the DCI would arrive at an active facility or a cleaned-out shell. He didn't have the answer. He sat with the not having it the way he'd learned to sit with uncertainty, in places where uncertainty was the only constant, not making peace with it. not pretending it was comfortable. No, just holding it without letting it make his decisions for him. At 11:57, his phone buzzed. A call, the same number as the text. He looked at the screen for 2 full rings. Then he answered it and said nothing. Just put the phone to his ear and waited. The other end, there was silence too. A voice, male, unhurried, with the particular careful cadence of someone who'd been trained to speak without revealing accent or affect, said 3 words. Last chance, Vance. And the line went dead. Caleb lowered the phone and looked at it. Then he looked at the curtain, at the narrow strip of parking lot light leaking in at the base, at Koda's silhouette near the door. Thought about 2 words, last chance. Not a threat exactly. Timeline marker. Someone was telling him the window was closing, and they wanted him to know they knew this number, and they wanted him to feel the walls of the situation coming inward. He thought about Lucy's drawing of Koda on the corkboard above her desk. He thought about the flatbed truck at Valiant's distribution, and the freight webbing, and the hollow darkness of the Red Hollow Mill complex in a winter storm. He thought about the figure in the dark at the river bridge. Nope, moving straight to the tire impressions, looking northeast. He stood up from the chair, crossed to the window, looked out through the narrow gap in the curtain at the parking lot, empty except for 3 vehicles including his truck, and the amber smear of the single lot light catching the falling snow. His phone said 12:03 a.m., and somewhere out in the dark, 3 miles northeast of where he was standing, the sound of engines moving through a frozen facility would either be the last act of an operation destroying its own evidence, or it would be the sound of something much worse beginning. Turned from the window, looked at the door, made a decision. He Noah first. Not gently, a firm hand on the shoulder, pressure until the eyes opened, because a man with a concussion waking in the dark needed an anchor before he needed information. Blinked twice, saw Caleb's face 6 inches from his, and the training took over before the sleep fully cleared. He sat up without being told. What time? Noah said. Question. An orientation check, just past midnight. Get your shoes on. Tessa was already awake. She'd been lying on her side facing the wall, and Caleb wasn't sure she'd slept at all, but when he crossed toward the window, she was already pushing herself upright with her good arm, the sling catching on the blanket and requiring a moment of undignified wrestling that she resolved without help and without comment. Caleb pulled the curtain back 2 inches and looked at the lot. 3 cars, still the amber lot light. The snow had stopped, but the wind was still moving through the gap between the motel building and the tree line at the lot's south edge, carrying the particular dry cold of a night that had dropped below 0 while they weren't paying attention. You got a call, Tessa said. It wasn't a question either. My name, Caleb said. They have this number. It said last chance, which is not the language of a group that's in a comfortable position. That's the language of a group that's running out of time and wants me to think they aren't. Was tying his bootlaces with the careful movements of someone whose head still hurt. So they're scared. They're managing exposure, which means something changed in the last few hours. They know the DCI is moving, or they've lost contact with someone inside the pipeline, and they can't account for what that person knows. Caleb dropped the curtain. We need to be somewhere other than this room. You said stay here, Tessa said. What I said. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. Things changed. She looked at him. Not challenging reading. She had that quality. He'd noticed it from the first day in the hospital. She watched faces, the way investigators watch crime scenes, looking for the detail that doesn't fit the narrative. Where are we going? She asked. Red Hollow, he said, preemptively, because he could see Noah's jaw starting to set in a certain direction. There's a position northeast of the mill complex, a ridge access 2 miles out that gives elevation and line of sight to the main loading docks. We can observe without entering the property. If something is moving at that facility tonight, we document from outside. We don't go in. We don't engage. We don't announce ourselves. And if the DCI is already there, Noah asked, then we see flashing lights from a ridge 2 miles away and we turn around and come back. If they're not there and someone is clearing the facility, Caleb pulled his jacket on. Then we document it and we call it in to your contact in Koda, and he relays it to the DCI in real time. Active intelligence on an ongoing operation is different from a file transmission. Puts eyes on the ground. Noah looked at Tessa. She looked at her boots. Neither of them said no, which with these two meant yes. And Caleb had already known it would, because they were both the specific type of person who'd rather be in motion with incomplete information than sitting still with a complete picture and no leverage. They left the motel at 12:19, one vehicle, Caleb's truck. He drove without headlights forth, the first quarter mile out of the lot, long enough to clear the road junction before any parked observer could get a plate. Then headlights on, normal speed, heading north on Route 44, with nothing behind them. The ridge access was a forestry road that had been cut into the eastern slope of the valley decades ago for fire management and hadn't been maintained since. Caleb had driven it once, in the fall, when he'd been scouting the area around Greyhaven with the methodical low-key thoroughness that had become so automatic he barely registered it anymore. Lucy had been with him that day. She'd called it a bumpy adventure road, which was accurate. Cut the headlights again at the forestry road junction and drove by moonlight. The snow cover helped the ground was bright enough under a clear sky to navigate by, and the road's edges were defined by the tree line on both sides. They climbed for 12 minutes. The ridge break was a natural clearing a gap in the tree canopy created by an old rockfall that opened onto a view of the valley floor below and, at the valley's northeast corner, the dark mass of the Red Hollow Mill complex. From this elevation and distance, the complex was a black shape against a slightly less black landscape. 4 structures: the elevated conveyor housings, the loading dock on the eastern face. Except the loading dock wasn't dark. Caleb stopped the truck on the ridge and killed the engine. Tessa said quietly. Light, not flood lighting the docks, weren't lit up. The specific moving light of vehicles inside a facility operating with minimal illumination. Headlights moving across the interior, low, disciplined. The way you light an operation when you don't want it seen from the road. Had his phone out, calling Dale. Tell him active vehicle movement at Red Hollow, northeast end docks, minimum 2 vehicles from the light pattern. Tell him they're moving product and they have maybe 2 hours before dawn gives them away. Was already talking. Caleb watched the mill complex through the truck's windshield, the glass beginning to fog slightly at the edges from their breath. The lights moving below, with the steady methodical rhythm of people who knew what they were doing and had done it before. Counted 3 distinct light sources, one stationary a vehicle left running near the northeast dock entrance. 2 mobile, moving in and out of the loading bay in a pattern consistent with a relay operation. What Tessa had seen on the river ice 6 weeks ago, scaled up, brought inside under cover. Tessa was photographing through the windshield with her phone zoomed to its limit, the image quality marginal, but the light movement patterns documentable. She wasn't asking permission. She was doing the job she would have been doing in a patrol car if someone hadn't rerouted her into a river ambush. Finished the call. Dale's relaying it now. He said the DCI had an operational team staged 40 miles south as of 9 p.m. He's pushing the real-time coordinates. 40 miles, Caleb said. He did the math. Mountain roads, winter conditions, a team that couldn't move at full speed without burning its approach angle. 50 minutes minimum, probably closer to 70. And they have what, 2 hours of darkness? Less now. They watched. The lights below continued their patient circuit. Once a 3rd mobile light source appeared briefly at the facility's southern access point, swept the road briefly, and disappeared back inside. Perimeter check. Someone was watching the approach routes. They have a lookout on the south access, Caleb said. That's the only paved road in, Tessa said, which means the DCI team can't come in from the south without being seen from a quarter mile out. Need the north forestry track or air support. This hour, yes, in these conditions, air is not happening, said. Caleb looked at the ridge road behind them. It ran north from this position for another 3 miles before connecting with a secondary county track that looped back down to the valley floor through the mill complex's northern buffer zone state forestry. Not part of the private parcels, but adjacent. A DCI team moving fast from the north could approach the facility without using the paved southern access road. Picked up his phone and called Dale's number directly. The man answered in 2 rings. He'd been expecting it. The south access has a perimeter lookout, Caleb said. If your people are coming from the south, they're burned before they get to the gate. North Forestry Track connects to the county secondary about a mile above the complex. That's the approach. A pause. Who is this exactly? As contact. I was Navy. That's all you need. Pause shorter. Copy. I'll pass it up. He hung up. Was looking at him. What? Caleb said. Nothing. Noah looked back at the mill complex. Just nothing. The next 40 minutes were the specific kind of tense that doesn't announce itself loudly. It was quiet. The lights below kept moving. The temperature in the truck dropped as the engine stayed off and the cold worked in through every seal and gap. Tessa's shoulder was bothering her. He could tell by the way she'd shifted her position twice and the small involuntary compression she did with her left hand when the sling angle wasn't right, but she didn't mention it. At 1:47 a.m., the lights at the facility changed. 2 mobile sources converged at the northeastern dock and stopped. Stayed stationary. The third light at the southern checkpoint moved briefly and then also went static. They're pausing, Tessa said. Or they finished loading and they're about to run, Noah said. He lead. Caleb was already watching the northern tree line at the valley floor, where the forestry track debouched onto the buffer zone. Visible yet. Either the DCI wasn't there, or they were running dark, which was the right call, and which meant he wouldn't see them until they were already inside the fence. 1:53. The southern checkpoint light went out completely. Turned off. Dropped. As in the person holding it put it down or fell or ran. Contact, Caleb said. The lights at the dock entrance held for 4 more seconds. The facility lit up, not with the DCI's lights, with the facility's own external lighting, the emergency floods on the dock face, snapping on all at once like the complex had decided to become visible. Kind of thing that happens when someone panics and hits the wrong switch. The sirens. Multiple, from both the north and the south simultaneously. The sound reaching the ridge 2 seconds after the lights. The delay giving the whole thing a slightly cinematic unreality that Caleb recognized as genuine crisis and not the movies, because in the movies, things happen in the right order. They're in, Noah said. Yeah. The lights below were chaos for about 90 seconds, the external floods, multiple vehicle headlights moving fast, the blue-red strobe of law enforcement vehicles stretching across the loading dock face. And then the pattern shifted from chaos to containment, and Caleb could see, even from 2 miles at elevation, the specific organized geometry of a coordinated entry, vehicles positioned to block egress routes, personnel spreading across the facility's footprint in a pattern that covered the loading bays and both secondary exits. It was over in terms of the facility operation. Caleb knew that. What remained was the legal aftermath, the securing of evidence, the processing of whatever personnel had been present, the documentation of cargo, the chain of custody work that would take not hours but months. We need to go down, Noah said. His voice had a tension in it that Caleb understood 2 officers watching a law enforcement action on an investigation that had nearly killed them from a ridge 2 miles away, unable to do anything except watch. Yet, Caleb, not yet, let them secure the scene. If we drive down in a civilian truck at 2 in the morning with a former Navy SEAL and 2 officers from the compromised department that this operation is connected to, we are the first problem they have to deal with. We wait until they've established command presence, and Noah calls Dale, and Dale calls the lead DCI agent and walks them through our status. Then we go down. Noah's hands were on his knees, pressed flat. He was controlling something. The particular rigid patience of a man who'd been victim by an operation he was supposed to be part of stopping, and who now had to watch someone else take the action while he sat on a ridge in the cold. Caleb said. He didn't elaborate. It was enough. Tessa had her phone to her ear. She was talking quietly to her sister in Laramie. Caught fragments, she's okay. Yes, it's happening. No, I'll call you in the morning. The ordinary human maintenance of a situation that had been anything but ordinary. He looked away to give her privacy. They waited 40 minutes on the ridge. Noah's contact Dale called back and said the DCI lead agent, a woman named Supervisor Hargrove, had been briefed on their presence and was requesting they come to the facility and provide preliminary statements. They drove down. The scene at Red Hollow in the small hours of a Wyoming winter morning was the kind of controlled institutional chaos that looks like disorganization from the outside and is actually a very specific process running on its own internal logic. Vehicles parked in precise positions, agents in marked jackets, moving with the unhurried purpose of people on a clock they control. Evidence markers going down. A generator running for the portable lighting array. 2 individuals in zip-tie restraints, seated against the exterior dock wall, with a uniformed officer standing nearby. Caleb recognized neither restrained individual. He was parking when his eyes found something else. A third person, hands secured, being walked from the facility's interior office by 2 DCI agents. Taller, older, the particular confident bearing he'd identified from a distance at the hospital 3 mornings ago. Warren Pike. In civilian clothes, he hadn't been working tonight officially. He'd been here as himself. Noah saw it at the same moment. Caleb heard the sharp intake of breath from the passenger seat and felt Noah go very still beside him. Tessa started from the back. Yes, Noah said. Caleb watched Pike being walked across the loading dock. The man moved with a specific held dignity, not struggling, not compliant either, just present in his own arrested body with the stiff-necked composure of someone who had already decided what posture he was going to maintain. He didn't look toward Caleb's truck. He didn't look toward the ridge. He looked straight ahead. Caleb got out. Supervisor Hargrove found them 3 minutes later, a compact woman in her late 40s, dark jacket with DCI in yellow letters across the back. No-nonsense, pragmatic energy of someone who had been running operations like this for long enough that the adrenaline had been replaced by methodology. She had a tablet in one hand and a coffee cup in the other, which she set on the hood of a nearby vehicle before extending her hand to each of them. Officers Mercer and Rowe, she said. Not a greeting. Confirmation. Yes, ma'am, Tessa said. Hargrove looked at Caleb. And you're the civilian, Caleb Vance. She looked at him for a moment with the calibrated assessment of someone who'd been briefed that a former Navy SEAL had been providing operational intelligence on an active investigation and was withholding whatever she thought about that until she had more information. The ridge position, the north approach information. Good work. She said it cleanly without ceremony. We came up the north track, 30 seconds faster than the south team. She picked up her coffee. I'll need all 3 of you for statements. Separately, tonight here, before you go anywhere else. She looked at Tessa's sling. We have a medic if you need. I'm fine, Tessa said. Hey, Hargrove looked back at Caleb. You know anything about what's in those buildings? Freight staging operation, relay logistics on the river corridor, using the ice as a transit route to avoid tracked surfaces. I'd look at the cargo carefully. The level of operational security they were running, the infrastructure investment, the law enforcement protection layer, this wasn't local product distribution. This was transit. Greyhaven was a waypoint. Hargrove absorbed this without expression. You get all that from running your dog in the morning? I get it from paying attention. The corner of her mouth moved slightly. Quite anything. She made a note on her tablet. Caleb's statement took 45 minutes with a DC agent named Rourke, who had the thorough methodical energy of someone who understood that the details nobody mentioned were often the ones that mattered in court. Caleb gave him everything in the order it had happened, with the specific clarity of someone who'd filed operational reports across a decade and understood what investigators needed from a first-person account. He mentioned the part number on the freight clasp, the tire impression measurements, the business registry connections he'd found at the library, the tracking transmitter in the cabin, The text and the phone call. All of it, Rourke wrote without looking up. Occasionally he'd ask for a clarification, a date, a time, a specific sequence, and Caleb provided it. When it was done, Rourke looked at his notes for a moment. The phone call at midnight, he said. 3 words. Last chance, Vance. Yes. The number it came from, you didn't recognize it. I can give you the number. Please. After the statements, they brought the 3 of them into a temporary command space in the facility's former main office, a room with a folding table and 4 chairs and the specific smell of a building that had been closed for 15 years. Hargrove came in with a second agent and closed the door. What I'm going to tell you is preliminary and subject to change, she said. But given your involvement, you deserve a working picture. She looked at her tablet. You've secured 2 individuals on site, facility workers, hired labor, minimal knowledge of the broader operation. So we've secured Deputy Chief Warren Pike, who was present in a personal capacity and who was attempting to destroy physical records in the interior office when our agents entered. We've documented cargo consistent with large-scale contraband transit nature and quantity still being cataloged. She looked at Noah. Your patrol route was deliberately rerouted. That is confirmed. The system entry was made from a terminal registered to Pike's administrative credentials. We knew that, Noah said. He wasn't being combative. Just true. I know you knew it, Hargrove said. I'm confirming it for the record, as part of a formal investigation. The difference matters. What you knew and what we can prove are not the same thing, and the thing that gets Pike in front of a judge is the thing we can prove. She set the tablet down. Your testimony, both of you, is material to that. Your evidence chained the encrypted logs. The transmission to Laramie is material to that. The fact that you kept this outside the department once you identified the compromise is the reason this investigation still exists. Tessa was looking at her hands. She had the expression of someone absorbing something that they've been waiting to hear for long enough that the hearing of it doesn't feel like relief so much as the end of sustained pressure, a different thing entirely. The 2 reports I filed, she said quietly, the river traffic observations. We'll reconstruct them from your encrypted backups and corroborating witness accounts, Hargrove said. Enter the record with your original timestamps. She paused. You did the right thing, both of you. Noah didn't say anything. He was staring at the table surface with the kind of blank, controlled expression that Caleb had seen on people exiting sustained crisis, not quite processing yet, just existing in the space after the thing has stopped moving. Hargrove looked at Caleb. Mr. Vance, she said, I need to ask you something directly. Go ahead. Your background. The Marshal's office in Koda said former Special Operations Navy. How much of this investigation was driven by your independent action versus information sharing with the officers? All my actions were in support of Noah and Tessa's investigation. They had the evidence. I provided analytical support and logistical awareness. You went to the bridge site after the scene was processed. I went to walk my dog. She looked at him for a long moment. The agent beside her was expressionless. The tracking transmitter in the cabin, she said. You left it in place. Yes, that was the right call. A pause. Did you receive formal training in evidence preservation protocols? I received training that covered related concepts. Yes. Military context. Okay. She wrote something. You understand I need to document your involvement accurately for the investigation record. I understand. Former Navy SEAL. She said it without emphasis, but she said it, which meant she was putting it in the record and wanted him to know she was putting it in the record. Is that accurate? Caleb held her gaze. That's accurate. Hargrove nodded once and closed the tablet cover. You'll all need to be available for follow-up interviews over the next several days. Leave the area. Don't speak to Pike or anyone connected to the Greyhaven PD command structure before speaking with our office first. She stood up. Is there anything you need tonight? A ride back to the Ridgecrest, Tessa said. I left my car at a forestry cabin 8 miles up the valley. We can arrange that. Hargrove moved to the door, then stopped and looked back at Caleb one more time. With suspicion. something more like professional calibration. The north approach call, at 1:47 in the morning, from a ridge 2 miles out, in the dark. That's not civilian observation. No, Caleb said. It's not, she left. The DCI agent drove them back to the motel. Them talked in the vehicle. It was past 3 a.m., and the road was empty, and the mountains were the silhouette kind of dark that exists in the hour before dawn, begins assembling itself in the east. Whatever the agent driving thought about his 3 passengers, he kept it to himself. The motel, Caleb sat on the tailgate of his truck and looked north. The Red Hollow complex was invisible from here, tucked behind the valley's northern bend, but he knew exactly where it was, and he'd be able to find it in zero visibility if he needed to. The same way he could find every other location he'd assessed in Greyhaven since the first week he'd arrived. It was not a skill he'd asked for. It was just what happened when the training was deep enough. Tessa came out of the room and sat on the tailgate 6 inches from him. She had a motel blanket around her shoulders like a cape, and she looked tired in the honest, visible way that people only let themselves look when they've decided they're safe enough to stop performing. All of this, she said, within 72 hours. You came here, and within 3 days you had worked out what it was. All of it. More than we had after 6 weeks. He didn't argue with that. Why Greyhaven? She asked. For real. He looked north for a moment. I told you. Quiet. There are small, quiet towns all over Wyoming. This one had a good elementary school and a low property tax rate, and nobody who was likely to recognize my face. He paused. That was the whole calculation. She nodded slowly. She wasn't going to push it further, and he appreciated that. Do you think Pike will give up the network above him? She asked. If the cargo they find in those buildings is what I think it is, yes. Because holding out stops being a viable option when the weight of what's coming at you is large enough. What do you think it is? Caleb looked at his hands. I think Greyhaven was a transit point for something that started a long way from here and was going a long way further. I think the river corridor, the relay logistics, the mill complex, all of it was designed for volume and deniability and speed. I think whoever is above Pike in this structure had found a very clean route through a very remote part of Wyoming and was using a very trusted local law enforcement figure to keep it clean. And you found it, Tessa said, because your dog smelled blood under a bridge at 5 in the morning. Because my dog smelled blood, Caleb agreed. She was quiet. The wind came through the parking lot and lifted the edge of her blanket, and she pulled it back down. I would have been dead, she said. It wasn't dramatic. She said it the way people say things they've been thinking for days and finally allow out of their mouth because the appropriate moment has arrived. Hour in that snow. I know, you saved my life. She looked at him. Both our lives. Koda saved your lives. I just followed the dog. She smiled, not the edge of one this time. The real version, tired and genuine, and landing somewhere between gratitude and the specific complicated feeling of having survived something that didn't have to be survived. I'm going to sleep, she said. Yeah, she went inside. Caleb stayed on the tailgate for another 20 minutes in the cold, which was a discomfort he barely registered, and looked north and thought about nothing in particular, everything at once. He thought about the clean padlock on the Red Hollow gate and the transmitter pulsing red in the dark behind the firewood and the shape of Warren Pike being walked across a loading dock with his hands secured and his chin up. Thought about Hargrove saying, "That's not civilian observation," and the way the agent beside her had stayed expressionless, which was its own kind of expression. He thought about Lucy asleep at Mrs. Hadley's house. Corkboard drawings. The cardboard tube for Thursday's science project. He was going to have to make a decision about Greyhaven. He'd been making it since the moment under the bridge when he'd pressed 2 fingers against Noah Mercer's neck and felt the pulse still there, and the footprints in the snow had pointed away, but the tire tracks had pointed northeast. And something in him that had spent 18 months trying to be quieter than it actually was had recognized what it was looking at. He was going to have to make a decision. He already knew what it was. He sat on the tailgate in the dark a little longer anyway, and let the night be what it was, cold and clear and very quiet before he moved toward whatever was going to come next. He intervened. The decision had already made itself somewhere during the 40 minutes on the ridge, or maybe in the motel room watching the curtain. Maybe earlier than that, standing in the snow at the river bridge with 2 fingers on Noah Mercer's neck and the footprints still fresh around him. Caleb understood that about himself. The decisions that mattered rarely arrived as decisions. They arrived as facts he hadn't yet acknowledged out loud. He got off the tailgate at 3:47 a.m. and drove to Mrs. Hadley's house. He didn't go Shen. He sat in the truck in her driveway for a minute, with the engine off, and looked at the dark window of the guest room where Lucy was sleeping. The house was completely still. The neighborhood was completely still. Greyhaven at 4 in the morning was the specific silence of a small mountain town that didn't have enough people in it to generate ambient noise. And in that silence, the events of the past 4 days had a different weight than they'd carried while they were happening. Heavier in some places, lighter in others. The way things settle when the urgency drains out, and what remains is just the actual shape of what occurred. He drove home, slept 3 hours, was back at Mrs. Hadley's by 7:15 with Lucy's school bag and a box of the raspberry pastries from the gas station bakery that Lucy considered a special occasion food, and that Mrs. Hadley had a weakness for that she'd never directly admitted. Lucy came to the door in her socks and looked at the pastry box, and then at his face with the sequential assessment of someone who had learned to read him through the specific economy of his expressions. "Did you fix it?" she asked. He handed her the box. "I fixed it." She considered this. "Is it done fixing?" Getting there, she accepted that with a small nod that was very adult in its proportions, and turned to bring the pastries to Mrs. Hadley, and Caleb stood in the doorway and watched her go and felt something settle in his chest that didn't have a clean name, but that he recognized as the specific relief of a parent whose child has been safe during a period when safety was not a certainty. Mrs. Hadley appeared from the kitchen with a dish towel and the knowing expression of a 72-year-old woman who had lived in Greyhaven long enough to understand that things happened in this valley that the official version of events didn't fully account for. "You look like you've been up all night," she said. "Most of it. The police business." He looked at her. "What makes you say that?" She gave him the specific patient look of someone who finds the question slightly insulting. "Warren Pike's name has been on the radio since 5 this morning, Caleb. This is a town of 6,000 people." She folded the dish towel over her arm. "Are you all right?" "Yes." "Is Lucy safe?" "She was never in danger," he said. Which was true as far as it went, and they both understood it went only so far, and neither of them pushed it further. He got Lucy to school by 7:50, which required a negotiation about whether the raspberry pastry constituted adequate breakfast or a supplement to an actual breakfast, a negotiation that Caleb lost comprehensively. He stood at the school's front entrance and watched her go in, and she turned at the door and waved with the particular wave she used when she knew he was watching, small, quick, a little self-conscious, and then she was gone into the building. He sat in the parking lot for less than a minute this time. There were things that needed doing. The first was a call to the DCI's Cheyenne office, which Supervisor Hargrove had requested before they'd left Red Hollow. He made it from the truck, a brief, factual exchange with an administrative coordinator who confirmed that his formal follow-up interview was scheduled for the following afternoon, and that his documentation of the business registry connections he'd found at the library had been flagged as material to a parallel financial investigation that the DCI was running in coordination with federal authorities. The woman said federal without any particular emphasis, but Caleb caught it. Whatever had been moving through Red Hollow, it had reached a level that pulled in agencies above the state. He'd expected that, since he'd been expecting it since he'd looked at the operational discipline of those lights moving in the mill complex and felt the specific familiar weight of infrastructure that doesn't belong to amateurs. The second thing was a conversation he'd been putting off. He drove to the Greyhaven Police Department at 9:15. The building had the specific atmosphere of an institution in shock. Chaos, the personnel were at their posts, and the parking lot was orderly, and the front desk officer nodded at him with professional neutrality when he came in. But there was a quality in the air, a particular suspended quality, like a room full of people who've just received information they're still deciding how to hold. Warren Pike had been the department's second highest ranking officer for 11 years. The ripple from his arrest, in the small hours of a winter morning, was going to move through this building for a long time. He asked for Supervisor Greer. Greer came out to the lobby inside 3 minutes, which was faster than Caleb had anticipated. The heavy-set man with the State Department patch looked different than he had at the river bridge. 4 days ago, not smaller, exactly, but differently weighted. The confident ease replaced by something more careful and more tired. "Mr. Vance," Greer said. "Supervisor." A pause. Greer looked at him with the expression of a man calibrating what he owed and what he was going to say about what he owed. "You want to come back to my office? I'm fine here." Pause. Greer nodded slowly, accepting the territory. The lobby was neutral ground, which was what Caleb wanted, no hierarchy implied by whose room they were in. "I owe you an apology," Greer said. The words came out with the slight awkwardness of a man who doesn't say them often, but who has decided they're necessary. "When you came to us after finding the officers, I dismissed your observations." "You did. I shouldn't have." Caleb looked at him. With anger he'd processed, that somewhere during the 40 minutes on the ridge, and it had come out as something more other side, like acknowledgement. Men like Greer weren't malicious, they were calcified. They'd been the most experienced person in the room for long enough that they'd stopped considering that experience and authority weren't the same thing. "It cost time, Caleb said. "Not more than that, as it turned out. But it could have. I know. Mercer and Rowe are good officers. They'd been trying to tell you something was wrong for 6 weeks." Greer absorbed that, his jaw tightened slightly. "Yes. They were. Then that's the thing worth fixing," Caleb said. "Just what Pike did. The part that made it possible for him to do it, the part where the people below him who were seeing the problem clearly weren't being heard. He wasn't lecturing. He was making the practical case, way he'd learned, to make cases that needed to land without heat, without performance, just the structure of the argument and the space to receive it. That's the part that doesn't get fixed automatically when the investigation closes." Greer looked at him for a long moment. There was something working in the man's face that wasn't defensiveness, and wasn't quite agreement yet, but was moving in that direction. "What did you do?" Greer asked. "Before Greyhaven." "Navy," Caleb said. "Special operations." Greer nodded. He'd clearly already heard something along those lines. The radio had been busy since 5 a.m., and small towns had their own intelligence networks that outpaced official communications by hours. "How long were you in?" 12 years. Another nod. Calibration visible this time, Greer reassessing the last 4 days. From the new vantage, the quiet furniture maker rearranging into something that had always been there, but that nobody in Greyhaven had been paying attention to. Greer said, and then couldn't find the rest of the sentence. "I'm going to need to get back," Caleb said. He extended his hand and Greer shook it. Firm, brief, the handshake of two people who have arrived at a workable understanding without becoming friends about it. "Take care of your people, Supervisor." He left. The follow-up interview with the DCI the next afternoon ran 2 hours and 40 minutes in a conference room at the Greyhaven Town Hall, a neutral location which Hargrove had arranged deliberately. She had 2 agents with her this time, a legal counsel present for the record, and a clarity of purpose that suggested the preliminary results from Red Hollow had confirmed things that moved the investigation several steps forward from where it had been at 3 in the morning. "Cargo," Hargrove said, about 40 minutes in. "You said transit. You were right. We're still cataloging, but the preliminary picture is consistent with a multi-state trafficking network using the river corridor as a northern bypass for standard interdiction routes." She said it matter-of-factly, in the way investigators discuss things. They've seen enough of that the awfulness of it has become procedural. Greyhaven was a clean waypoint. 6,000 people, federal presence, a cooperative law enforcement command, remote geography. Whoever built this route chose well. How long had it been running? Caleb asked. Our best current estimate is 14 to 18 months. He thought about 18 months of river ice and relay patrol reports and altered patrol reports. It's two seen fin corpses, and Pike sitting finis in his office, 2 floors above officers who were trying to tell him something was wrong. No. Pike's cooperation, he asked. Hargrove's expression shifted by a fraction. He's talking. The weight coming at him from the federal layer is substantial. He's providing information about the network above him in exchange for considerations that aren't my determination to make. She paused. He'll be in federal custody before the end of the week. He's not coming back to Greyhaven in any official capacity. The legal counsel beside Hargrove made a note. Mercer and Rowe, Caleb said. Fully cleared, their investigation has been validated and formally entered into the record. The DCI will be issuing a statement to that effect. Hargrove looked at him directly. They're going to be fine. Because of the work they did, and because they were smart enough to get their evidence outside the building. They were smart enough on their own, Caleb said. I just provided the geographical reasoning. The corner of Hargrove's mouth did the thing it had done before. Almost something, Mr. Vance, she said. We're going to need to formally close out your involvement in this investigation, which means documenting your actions, your background as it's relevant, and the analytical contributions you made. That documentation goes into the record and is potentially discoverable in subsequent proceedings. She looked at him carefully. Is there anything in your service record or background that would complicate that? Classified engagements. Nothing that's relevant here, he said. My service record is what it is. I'm not asking for anything to be withheld. She held his gaze for another moment. Then, okay. The rest of the interview was technical sequences, timelines, specific details for the evidentiary record. He gave everything clean and in order, and the legal counsel's pen moved steadily across the notepad, and when it was done, Hargrove shook his hand and walked him to the building's front entrance, and they stood for a moment in the cold outside the door. You're staying in Greyhaven? She asked. Yes, furniture business. Custom work. I have a backlog. She studied him with the particular assessment she'd been applying to him since Red Hollow, the one that wasn't quite professional evaluation and wasn't quite personal curiosity, but lived in the space between. If you ever considered a different kind of work, she started. I appreciate that, Caleb said, and he meant it. But I have a daughter and a dog and a wood shop. That's what I'm doing. Hargrove nodded once. Clean, accepting. Take care of yourself, Mr. Vance. You too, supervisor. To pick up Lucy. Ease. She was waiting at the front of the school with 3 other kids, talking about something with the animated full-body investment that children bring to conversations about things they actually care about. He pulled up and she said a rapid goodbye to the others and climbed in, and Koda's head immediately appeared over the seat back, and she grabbed his ears and said hi the way she always did. Can we go to the river? She asked. He looked at her. What river? The Harrow. Priya says when it starts to thaw, you can see the bottom through the ice. Like a window. It's February. I know, but it's going to thaw eventually. Can we go when it does? He drove out of the school parking lot and turned south toward home. Yeah, he said. We can do that. The weeks that followed had a different texture than the weeks before. Dramatically different. The woodshop was still. The woodshop. The morning runs were still. The morning runs. Lucy's homework still required the same negotiations. It's about whether what she'd written was long enough or just long enough that she'd decided it was long enough, which were not the same thing. Koda still ran the fence line in the back field. The coffee maker still ran on its timer. But things had shifted in the specific way that things shift when a weight you've been carrying without naming it has been set down. Gone, just set down the Sheridan lease. He'd called and canceled it in the first week, paid the break fee without complaint, and told the property manager something had changed. Property manager had said okay, and that was the end of it. He hadn't fully registered what it cost him to make that call until after he'd hung up. Not money, something The last of the plan he'd made 3 months ago in a different version of himself, the version that believed the right answer to having a past was to keep it sufficiently far behind you that it couldn't catch up. He sat with the canceled lease for about 10 minutes. He went back to the workshop and finished the shelving unit he'd been building for a family in Casper, and that was that. Mercer came to the house 3 weeks after Red Hollow. Came in the early evening, off duty, with the careful, slightly too casual demeanor of someone who has been thinking about making a visit for a while and has finally decided to just do it. He stood in the doorway of the workshop and looked at the wood shop with the genuine interest of someone who hadn't expected what he found. "This is real," Noah said. "Like you actually do this." "That surprise you?" "I don't know what I expected." He picked up a finished corner joint from the workbench, examined it, set it back down carefully. "Tessa's going back on duty Monday, I heard. She's, She's good. She's mad, still. About Pike, about the 6 weeks she spent filing reports into a system that was eating them. She'll be mad about that for a while. That's fair." Was quiet for a moment. He was looking at the half-finished cabinet frame on the main bench with the particular unfocused gaze of someone who isn't really looking at the cabinet. "I wanted to say something," Noah said, "and I kept not knowing how to say it, so I kept not coming. And then I decided the not knowing how wasn't a good enough reason to keep not coming." He looked at Caleb. "What you did, what you gave up, being involved in this, the exposure of your background, the DCI interview, all of it. You didn't have to do any of it. You could have called 911 from the bridge and gone home and let the rest of it be someone else's problem." Caleb set down the chisel he'd been holding. "Yeah. Why didn't you?" The workshop was quiet, except for the particular wood and oil smell of a space that was used regularly and well. Outside, the evening was doing the thing Wyoming evenings did in late February, going dark fast, the mountains taking the last light before the valley was ready to let it go. "Because the footprints went northeast," Caleb said. "And I already knew what they meant. Walking away from a thing you understand isn't the same as walking away from something you don't. It's a different choice." Noah looked at him for a moment. "Okay," Noah said. "How's the head?" "Better. Still gets loud sometimes. Doctor says that's normal for grade 3. He reached into his jacket and put something on the workbench. "A bottle of bourbon mid-shelf, Wyoming label. The kind of thing you bring when you're not sure what to bring, but you want to bring something. Tessa wanted to come. She's coming Saturday. I just wanted to come first." Caleb looked at the bottle. "You want a glass?" "Yeah," Noah said. "I do." They sat on the workbench stools and drank without rushing it and talked about things that had nothing to do with river corridors or tracking transmitters, Noah's truck, which needed a new transfer case, a restaurant in town that had apparently closed and reopened under new management with a completely different menu that Noah approved of. Yes, he divined whether the county was actually going to repave the Valley Road this spring the way they'd been saying for 3 years. The ordinary infrastructure of 2 people becoming, without making a decision about it, something like friends. Lucy appeared in the workshop doorway at 7:15 in her pajamas to ask if Noah wanted to stay for dinner, because she and Caleb were having chili. Looked at Caleb. "It's good chili," Caleb said. "Yeah," Noah said. "Thanks." Tessa came on Saturday. She brought Priya, Tessa's niece it turned out, who was in Lucy's class at Birchwood, a connection that Lucy greeted with the specific delight of discovering that the adult world occasionally organized itself in ways that benefited children directly. 2 of them disappeared into Lucy's room within 4 minutes of arrival and did not re-emerge for an hour. Tessa stood in the kitchen while Caleb made coffee and looked out the window at the back where Koda was doing his perimeter run and the mountains were doing what the mountains did this time of year, keeping their distance, keeping their weather, not promising anything about spring. "My lieutenant called me yesterday," she said. "The new acting lieutenant. Under the interim command structure, while the department goes through review." She wrapped her hands around the mug he handed her. He apologized, formally, in his office on the record. Said the department had failed to act on credible reports and that the consequences of that failure were his responsibility as a command officer. "Was that?" Caleb asked. She thought about it. Good. Both. A pause. It doesn't undo 6 weeks of filing reports into a black hole. It doesn't undo the bridge. She looked at him. But it was real. He meant it. That matters. Yeah, she drank her coffee. Think I want to do something different, she said. In terms of role. Not leave the department, I'm not doing that. But the corruption investigation work, the interdiction intelligence, the kind of thing that we were doing there, are units that do that specifically, and I want to be in one. She said it with the particular directness of someone who has spent the time, since almost dying, deciding exactly what they actually want to do with their life, and has stopped being cautious about saying it. You'd be good at it, Caleb said. I know, she said, which was not arrogance. It was just true, and she'd clearly decided that saying true things plainly was now her preferred mode. Koda came in from outside and went immediately to Tessa and put his head against her knee, and she reached down and scratched behind his ear with a genuineness that the dog received and acknowledged by staying there. He likes you, Caleb said. He has good judgment. She looked up. Are you actually staying? In Greyhaven. Yes. He poured his own coffee. Looked at the mountains through the window. I had a plan, he said. Sheridan. Queter. Further from everything. He paused. Cancelled it because of this. Because of this. And because he stopped. Thought about how to say the thing that was true. Spent a long time thinking that peace meant distance. If I got far enough from the things I used to do, from the person I used to be, I'd arrive somewhere clean. He looked at his coffee mug. That's not how it works. No, Tessa said. It's not. Greyhaven's not clean. It's got a compromised department and a trafficking case that's going to be in federal court for 2 years, and a dead padlock on an old mill gate that I'm going to see every time I drive that road. He paused. But Lucy's likes her school and Koda likes the field, and I've got a backlog of furniture orders, and apparently I have people here now. He said the last thing in the way that meant it cost something to say, not because it was painful, but because it was true. And true things said out loud had a weight that they didn't have when they were just being held. Tessa looked at him. Then she looked back out the window at the mountains. For what it's worth, she said, Greyhaven's glad you stayed. From Lucy's room, the sound 2 8-year-olds laughing at something specific and private, and theirs arrived in the kitchen with the clarity of something that had earned its right to be ordinary. The formal DCI investigation ran for 7 months. Warren Pike pleaded guilty to federal charges in the Springs conspiracy obstruction and a series of charges related to his role in facilitating the trafficking network's operations through Greyhaven. Received a sentence that the federal prosecutor's office described as significant, which in the specific language of press releases meant the kind of number that closes certain doors permanently. He did not return to Greyhaven. His name was removed from the department directory before the season changed. Above Pike took longer. It ran in threads through 3 states and 2 countries, and the federal case moved with the deliberate geological pace of large prosecutions. But it moved. Hargrove's office issued 2 updates over the course of the year that confirmed ongoing progress, and Dale's contact in Cody sent Noah a brief message in the fall that said simply, they got the top. Forwarded it to Caleb without comment, which was the right amount of comment. Tessa transferred into the DCI's Western Region Interdiction Unit in June, a position that had been quietly shaped by Hargrove's recommendation, and that Tessa had gotten on her own merits, which she was specific about distinguishing. She kept her Greyhaven apartment. She and Noah remained partners in the specific way that people who have been through something real together remain things that don't have simple names. The Valley Road got repaved in August. Noah was insufferably satisfied about this. In September, on a morning when the aspens had gone the particular impossible yellow that they go in a Wyoming fall, Caleb ran his route at 5:15, and Koda pulled him left at the tree line above the Harrow River. And for one specific second, Caleb felt his whole body remember the morning in February when this had all started. Cold, the dark, the 2 fingers on a pulse that might not have been there. He let the memory come and let it go and ran on. The river was low in late season, clear to the bottom in the shallows. The summer melt long spent. He could see the gravel bed through the moving water in the places where the channel ran shallow over rock. The window Priya had described to Lucy, who had described it to him, who had brought them both out in April when the ice broke to show them. Lucy had crouched at the bank for 10 minutes, her face close to the water, watching whatever moved beneath. He ran the full route and came home at 6:40 and made coffee and fed Koda and sat at the kitchen table in the early morning light that came through the east window and made the wood of the table grain, visible in a way it only was at this specific hour. Lucy came down at 6:50 with her polar bear pajamas and her hair committed to one side and the laminated science sheet that had replaced the previous laminated science sheet from the previous project. She sat across from him with her cereal and looked at him in the quiet, specific way she had. "You ran the bridgeway," she said. "I did. Was it okay?" He looked at his daughter. He was 8 years old and perceptive in the way that children are when they've grown up paying attention, and who had asked the question, with asked the directness of someone who wanted the real answer, the managed one. "Yeah," he said. "It was okay." She nodded and looked at her science sheet and ate her cereal, and Koda lay under the table between their feet, and the light through the east window moved with the slow patience of a morning that had nowhere else to be. Caleb drank his coffee. Outside, Greyhaven was waking up the first trucks on the valley road, the distant bark of a dog 2 properties over, the specific sound of a small town assembling itself into another day without drama, without incident, with the ordinary, unnoticed persistence of a place that was still here. He had stopped running from his own story the morning. He followed a dog under a bridge and found 2 people who needed him to be exactly who he was. He hadn't known that was what he was doing at the time. Yes, he'd intervened. He'd been too cold, too focused, too busy pressing 2 fingers against a stranger's neck in the dark to understand that something was ending and something was beginning simultaneously in that frozen space under a railway bridge in Wyoming. That was how it usually worked. The moments that changed you didn't announce themselves. They just arrived, and they needed something from you. And if you were paying attention, if you had it filled your ears with noise, and your days with distance, and your plans with the careful architecture of not being found, you had something to give. Caleb had been paying attention. That was, in the end, the whole of it. The person standing quietly between you and the dark is rarely the one making noise about it. Most of the time, they're just the one who stayed.